All right, everybody, welcome back to Horn Takes. It's Friday. It's game day eve. That means it's time for another rundown. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about a whole lot of college football today. But before we get into college football, I want to talk a little bit about some college basketball. College basketball is underway. Texas basketball had a huge game against Gonzaga on Wednesday night, the number 2 team in the country. And Texas put it on them. Texas looked really good in that game. Gonzaga got out to a pretty big lead and early, and as a Texas fan, I'm sitting here going, yeah, I've seen this before. But they battled back quick, took the lead, built the lead, and never even got close to giving up the lead again. They dominated that game for probably 3/4 of the game, a half and a half. Tyrese Hunter, 26 points. Shot the ball well from all over. Marcus Carr had some really big, long-distance shots. They got some help inside. Not your typical, not like Timmy, how he'll just post up, push some guys back some guys down, hit some layups. These were really athletic, down-low type plays Texas was getting. And they're going to have to be that way. They're just not big, huge guys. I mean, their height's 6'8", 6'9", which is tall, right? But we're not talking like huge center type guys. Not guys Texas is used to having down low. Speaking of Timmy, they held him to 18 points, which is less than half of what he scored on him last year, 37 points last year. I thought what was really impressive to me was I had talked in a podcast before about Texas's half-court offense looking really bad. Like they just struggled. They were really good at it Wednesday night. And I think maybe the difference is a lot of those shots that weren't going down for them in those first 2 games from the perimeter started to fall. And you go back and look at the stats for the game, they didn't, it wasn't amazing what they did from beyond 3. It was good. It was in the 40s, which I think is probably above average slightly. But they were just that bad the first couple. I mean, they couldn't hit anything. In the first half of that first half Wednesday night, they couldn't hit anything. And then somebody made one, and they just started raining threes. But the ball movement was good. They limited turnovers. They only had 10. They looked like a really, really solid basketball team. And what was really eye-opening about it was it didn't matter who was out on the court. There was never really a fall off when some of the backup guys came in. So exciting times for Texas basketball. They forced 20 turnovers on defense. I mean, they got after Gonzaga, Timmy especially. He struggled hard. He didn't get a lot of clean looks. Like I said, he got his baskets. He got his points. He's a good basketball player. He's going to score points. But they did a really good job of neutralizing. I mean, actually, when I went back to look at how many points he actually scored, I was kind of surprised it was as many as it was because he just seemed like a non-factor in the game at all for the entire game. So kudos to Chris Beard. Kudos to the team. You didn't win anything really Wednesday night, but you proved you can go out on the basketball court and play against a good team, dominate a good team. So it should be an exciting season for Texas basketball. They have another big test in a couple weeks. Creighton, also a top 10 team. They get them at home. That's good. Even though the Moody Center isn't really a huge home field advantage, home court advantage. That's just traditionally not been something Texas has had. Apologize. I'm still getting over some flu-like symptoms, so had to get me a drink of water there. So yeah, now let's go to college football. Who's on upset alert this weekend? I had 2 games I talked about last week. I want to talk about 4 this week. And again, I'm not calling upsets. I'm just saying these are games that would not surprise me if the favorite didn't find a way to lose. First one I'll talk about, TCU at Baylor. TCU's coming off a big win against Texas. I think they heard a lot all week last week about, I mean, there were some guys saying Texas was going to run TCU by like 2 or 3 touchdowns. For a number 4 team in the country, there was an awful lot of talk about how they weren't going to be in the playoff picture after the game in Austin. I think they were a 7-point underdog in that game. They went into Austin. They took care of business. And they did it in kind of one of those emotional games where, you know, that game went down to the end. Those are emotionally taxing. They're physically taxing. It's almost like, you know, they probably heard all week long about how Texas was going to beat them. So they end up winning that game, and it's almost like you've crossed this, you know, imaginary finish line. It can be hard for young people, kids as I call them, too much, and people don't like it on here. I apologize. People on TikTok hate it. But I'm still going to call them kids. 1, because I'm old. 2, because they're adults, but they're still kids. They do dumb shit. They don't know how to handle stuff. Most of them. It's hard for kids to go through what they just went through and come back and be ready to prepare the way you got to prepare to go on the road again and try to keep that undefeated season alive. So Baylor, they're not a great team. I think they're good enough to beat TCU if TCU doesn't give their best effort. So again, not calling it. Wouldn't be surprised if TCU went into Waco, struggled, found a way to lose that game. By the way, these are all these teams that are on upset alert. They're all on the road. I think people underestimate how hard it is to go on the road, play games, win games, perform well. Next one's Ole Miss at Arkansas. Ole Miss coming off a tough loss against Alabama. Going to Fayetteville. Where Arkansas just played a really good game. Almost beat LSU. And I think if you listen to the podcast last week, LSU was on upset alert in Fayetteville. And Ole Miss is on upset alert this week in Fayetteville for almost the same exact reasons. They just played a game against Alabama. Now, Ole Miss didn't win that game like LSU won that game. But it's the same type of deal. We got up all week for Alabama. We poured all this emotional effort into Alabama. Now it's over. Like we crossed this imaginary finish line. Got to turn around and get yourself back prepared to play mentally and physically in a tough place to play against a team that's got talent. Wouldn't surprise me at all if Ole Miss went into Fayetteville, left Fayetteville with a loss. Third one, USC at UCLA. This one's not as much of a road game, so to speak. But if UCLA sold that place out, like they're claiming, Could be a home field advantage for UCLA. The line's really close. UCLA can run the football. Chip Kelly's been there. Chip Kelly's been in. He's got more experience in these types of games than Lincoln Riley does. Not calling it, just saying. Wouldn't surprise me if USC lost at UCLA. And then the fourth one is Texas at Kansas. I don't feel like I need to talk about this one a lot. It's going to be cold. It's going to be windy. Kansas wants to run the football. This is a perfect type of game to run the football. They've got two quarterbacks. It doesn't matter which one plays. They're both mobile guys. Their games are basically the same. They kill you with their legs. And Texas is kind of at that tipping point. You know, they're pretty much out. I mean, they're not mathematically eliminated from Big 12 championship picture. But it's going to take a lot. They're going to have to win out, and then Kansas State's going to have to lose, and Oklahoma State's going to have to lose. I mean, it's not very probable that all of those things happen. And I think they know that. And so, you know, will Texas be able to rally around themselves with not a whole lot to play for and figure out a way to go on the road and beat a team that embarrassed you at home last year? Not calling it, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if Texas went on the road, lost to Kansas. All right, Pac-12. We haven't talked about Pac-12 at all this year. We haven't on this show. I don't feel like the Pac-12 has got a whole lot of attention nationally ever since the Oregon game against Georgia, really. I think everybody was excited about what USC and Oregon could do prior to the season, and then they saw what happened to Oregon against Georgia, and they were like, God dang. The Pac-12 is a lot further off than we thought. But since then, Oregon's been really good. USC's had one sort of slip up against Utah, who's also a very good team. Utah is kind of like the Kansas State of the Pac-12. They're always going to be tough. They're going to be disciplined. And they've got some good players. Like, they can beat you, right? Like, they're good at winning football games in Utah. But I think the Pac-12's they're on the stage this weekend. They've got the stage this weekend. They're really kind of the only big thing going on in college football this weekend. Just looking strictly at matchups. Pac-12 picture could be really clear after this weekend. If USC and Oregon win, they're pretty much in. USC doesn't have to play another Pac-12 game. Oregon would have to then win against Oregon State to keep themselves in the number 2 position. Or the Pac-12 race could be like a big mess with a log jam of 2 lost teams at second place. And I went and read their rules a little bit. I didn't want to think past like what all might happen and could happen, and it would just be a mess. So the 2 big games are USC at UCLA. USC is a 2-point favorite. USC gets Jordan Addison back, who's he's a Biletnikoff winner. He's best wide receiver in the country last year. He's been hurt the last few weeks. That'll obviously be a spark for Lincoln Riley's offense. Supposedly he's 100%. But then on the other side, you got Chip Kelly, and you've got that UCLA running game, and just all his experience in these types of big games. They're at home. So at the very least, things are more familiar for the players. There's just something different about being at home and that sort of routine you can get into that you don't even have to think about because it's the same thing you've been doing all season long at home. When you go on the road, there's always like these little different things about being on the road. There's, a different place you got to go dress, and there's a different place you got to stay, and it's a different trip everywhere you go on the road. It's just really hard to build routine around being on the road. So that familiarity, that could be a huge advantage for UCLA. I know I have it as a possible upset alert, but if I have to predict this game, I don't know. I'm not going to give you guys a score because I don't know. I think there's going to be a lot of points in this game. I do think USC is going to win this game by a couple scores. 10 to 13 points. But wouldn't surprise me if they got. Wouldn't surprise me if Chip Kelly figured out a way to keep the ball out of that offense's hands with his running game. Keep Caleb Williams on the sideline. Keep Jordan Addison on the sideline. If he can do that and he can cash in on some of those drives with some touchdowns, I think UCLA's got a shot. It's a rivalry game. Crosstown rivals. Should be a fun game to watch. I'm definitely going to tune that one in. Then you got Utah and Oregon. Utah's got an experienced quarterback. We talked about it earlier. Utah's like this. I think they're the Kansas State of the Pac-12. They're just always disciplined. They're always tough. I talked last week about Kansas State having to go into Baylor and how Baylor was on upset alert. And one of the reasons why is because Kansas State is just a tough team. They're a disciplined team. They're not flashy almost in any way, but they just consistently find ways to just beat you and wear you down and out physical you. And so I think Utah, and I'm certainly not trying to compare Utah to Georgia because I don't think they're the same team. I don't think there's really any teams that are put together the way Georgia is, but I think Utah is probably like the closest thing to Georgia that Oregon will have to play this year. They're the closest thing to Georgia that Oregon will play this year. Just from like a discipline and toughness and just wear you out type perspective. Utah does have to go on the road in Autzen Stadium. It'll be crazy. It's a night game. I think it's a 7:30 local kick. So they will be sauced up. And Autzen is one of those places that inexplicably is 20,000 times louder than it should be. But I think Utah is going to go on the road, and I think they're going to win this game by 10. I don't have a score. If I had to pick a score, I'd say 31-21, 38-28, something like that. Here we go, Texas at Kansas. This is an absolute must-win for Texas, and not really even for what will happen this season. Sure, it's a game where they can keep their Big 12 title hopes alive. If they don't win this one, they're absolutely done from a Big 12 title perspective. But this is like the type of game you got to come back and win. Like, these are the types of games I mentioned earlier, how they're kind of on a tipping point. They're kind of at this spot where, they got two choices now. They can either really buckle down and try to win these last two games, Or they can sort of set back and say, man, we don't really have anything to play for anymore. I don't really care that much. If they choose the former, they can win those 2 games. They can stay in that hunt for the Big 12 championship. But more importantly, they keep recruiting on track. I think the game against TCU, they had a lot of recruits in there, a lot of big-time recruits, and I think they made a really good impression on a lot of the 2023 class, guys that were there that are still, maybe they're committed other places, but they're definitely interested in seeing Texas, right? They were there. Mostly a lot due to Arch Manning. You know, he's been jumping on these guys ever since he committed to Texas, trying to get a lot of these guys, national guys, to come play with him. But you win your last 2 games, you really set yourself up for a good start for next year, not only in recruiting, but just positive vibes, right? Finish the season strong. You go have a good showing in a bowl game. There's positive excitement, you know, in the program, right? You sign a good 2023 class, which it looks like they're going to do, and it could get, you know, a lot better. It could get significantly better. I don't know how much winning these last 2 games necessarily helps them in recruiting, but I think losing these last 2 games would absolutely hurt them in recruiting. I think some of those guys that are maybe sitting there today, your Anthony Hills, your Jaden Greathouses, those type of guys that are committed other places, but I guess Anthony Hill's not committed. He was a Texas A&M commit. It seems now he's a heavy lean to Texas because those were always his 2 choices. But I think you go out and lay a couple eggs in these last 2 games, guys like that might go, man, I'm not feeling that. And you know the other coaches are still after these guys. So I think it's really important for Texas to find a way to go on the road and win this game. To build some momentum for next season. I think the keys to this game are pretty simple for Texas. They got to establish the running game. And they got to stick with the running game. KU's the 93rd ranked rushing defense in the country, so they're not good. Excuse me. They got to get Ewers back on track. KU's passing defense is worse than their rushing defense. They're ranked 118th in the country. Texas needs to get Ewers back on track. He struggled in 2 out of his last 3 games. He wasn't great in the game. He wasn't terrible in. He hasn't really been good since the OU game. So Steve Sarkisian's got to find a way to take some pressure off of him and get him in a place mentally where he can start just not thinking so much and just getting the ball out to his playmakers. Steve Sarkisian we cannot go into Lawrence, Kansas on a cold, windy day and throw the ball 50 times. If that's what happens on Saturday, Texas will lose that football game. Texas has got to be disciplined but disruptive on defense. They got to put pressure on those quarterbacks, but they have to contain those quarterbacks. I think the best quote-unquote passing plays in this game for Kansas will be plays where they drop back to pass, and the quarterback there's nothing there, and they don't contain him with the pass rush, and he takes off. Or plays where they can move around enough with pressure to where the wide receivers get open behind the secondary and they make some big plays over the top. I don't think either one of those quarterbacks from KU is going to drop back, plant their back leg on a 5-step drop, deliver a pass on time all day long against anybody. It's going to be those quarterbacks' legs that extend passing plays or just completely turn into rushing plays when the route stuff breaks down and nobody's open or the pressure gets to them. So they got to be disciplined enough to stay in their rushing lanes, but they got to be disruptive enough to keep those guys uncomfortable. Not easy. It won't be easy. And then Texas needs to play a clean game. No penalties. No penalties is probably impossible. But they need to limit the penalties, especially the pre-snap penalties. They need to be able to get off the field on 3rd and long. Protect Ewers. Now, how can Kansas win this game? We talked about their defensive rankings. They are bad. And I didn't realize they were that bad until I went and looked it up. I think the number one way they can win the game is with their running game. Specifically those QBs. We talked about it a little bit ago. Their quarterbacks can hurt you with their feet. But they're ranked 18th in the country in rushing. So there's no doubt on a cold, windy day, that's what KU's going to come in and want to do. They're going to want to run the football. Now, Texas has had a really good run defense this year. Excuse me. But it'll be interesting to see strength on strength, who wins out. Another thing they're going to kind of have to do, and another way they can win this game, is to make Texas one-dimensional on offense. If they can find a way to stack the box, shut down the running game, take some chances early on to get Texas to abandon that running game, then I think Texas is in trouble. Because I don't think in the wind and cold that Quinn Ewers is going to be able to do enough to lead Texas to a win. And then I think if they confuse Ewers with that 3-3-5, two of Ewers' worst games this year have come against defenses that run 3-3-5 base alignment. If they can confuse him and get some turnovers, they can easily win this game. So now it's prediction time. I've gone back and forth on this one. The ultra Texas fan in me says it's KU. Texas is going to go beat KU. They're going to do this. They're going to, Sark's going to have the troops rally. They're going to come back and they're going to show up this weekend and they're going to play a great game and they're going to run over the top of Kansas. The pessimistic Texas fan in me is going, man, they don't really have a lot to play for anymore. Quinn Ewers has struggled a lot the last 3 games. Steve Sarkisian has made no inference that he would take Ewers out no matter how bad he's struggling. The weather isn't going to be great in this game. Last time Texas played in just some bad windy weather, Sark said, hey, we're going to throw the ball 49 times, and Ewers completed 19 passes out of 49 pass attempts. But what I feel like is going to happen in this game, and again, Texas is a 9-point favorite, which is just absurd to me. What I feel like is going to actually happen in this game is I think Texas will get back on track with the running game. And I think they'll essentially will run over the top of KU. And I think they're going to end up winning this game 31-27 in Lawrence. So there's the prediction for the Texas game. Subscribe to the podcast. Tell your friends about the podcast. You can actually check out a video of the podcast. If you don't like to just listen to podcasts, you can watch me do the podcast on YouTube. Horn Takes Podcast. You can find me on TikTok at Horn Takes Podcast. You can send me emails at horntakespodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to answer your questions. Thanks for hanging in there with me through this crummy sore throat. Hook 'em.